Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Holliston School Committee special meeting. Today is Monday, June 29th. It is 9:18. I'm calling the meeting to order. Pursuant to the Governor's order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Paragraph 20, as well as the Select Board's emergency order dated March 16th, 2020, the Holliston School Committee will be using remote participation for this meeting. The audio of this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the HCAT webpage within 24 hours in accordance with the Governor's emergency action requirement of keeping the public informed of actions during this meeting. I ask that all participants remotely attending please state your first name for identification purposes each time you speak. At this time, I will call a roll call. Mrs. Listevnik.
Present.
Ms. Savard.
Present.
Ms. Koshin.
Present.
Ms. Naborski.
Present.
Ms. Hanstead.
Present.
Mr. Morton.
Present.
Mrs. Raffi. Present. At this time, I'll entertain a motion to approve remote participation.
Moved by Dawn.
Seconded by Cynthia.
Moved by Dawn, seconded by Cynthia. Roll call vote. Mrs. Listevnik.
Yes.
Ms. Savard.
Yes.
Ms. Koshin.
Yes.
Ms. Naborski.
You're frozen, Stacy. Do you know it?
Oh, you're frozen to me, but everyone else.
Stacy's not frozen for me.
Nor me.
Ann Louise, you're frozen for us.
Mr. Morton.
Present. Yes. So yes.
Mrs. Raffi, yes, and Ms. Hanstead is frozen. All right, let's give her a minute to either log back in or move. Might move locations in the house.
Stacy.
Yeah.
Question. Wait.
Yep.
Oh, she's disappeared. The conflict of interest form that needs to be done at the end of this month. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so we need to get it off the town website and send. Can we send it back the same way we sent back the voting application as a? We can email it back.
Yes.
Okay.
That's the one with about the fees, how we vote on matters. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I just thought of that the other day.
I feel like I signed that, but I don't remember whether I sent it in. Okay.
The other thing
Let's
you
do it
could
again.
do is, if it's easier, you could email it to, actually, Lisa Aronian goes on vacation on Wednesday, but if you wanted to email it to Lisa Aronian today or tomorrow.
Okay. I can do that after the meeting today. Thank
Okay.
you. Is iPad 10 Ann Louise? No. Oh, there she is. We can't hear you, Ann Louise.
Yes, and I'm sorry, this happened on Friday for some reason, so it just dropped. I don't know what happened, so I may have to do this once or twice during the meeting. I apologize in advance.
Okay, so what's your vote for remote participation, Anne Louise?
That would be yes,
Okay.
almost.
Excellent. Okay. So this morning I was trying to figure out a way to best sort of organize our thoughts, etc. I really hate sharing the screen because I can only see 3 or 4 people up top, and it's hard to run a meeting when I can't see all of the participants. So my initial thought was sort of whiteboard out our pros and cons of each candidate. We can certainly whiteboard it on a piece of paper that one of us takes notes on. I'm open to ideas, but I really want to be able to see all of your faces because it's hard to manage the meeting when I can't see your face.
Stace, this might sound crazy. Do you have a second screen or device you can log in on? Okay.
Well, my phone and no.
Just no.
Yeah,
I
let's say no.
I would do it, but I know I'm at risk for dropping. So if anyone else has that option, they might be able to handle the whiteboard piece and share that screen. Just a thought.
You know,
In what way do you mean, Anne Louise?
It's like that eighth screen is like an
Oh,
eighth
I see what you
person.
mean.
And
Okay.
you log in and you share that screen, but you still get to see on your other monitor. I mean, you can see, there's a way to reduce the Zoom part. I figured it out last week. Like there's a way to reduce the Zoom participants. So they're in a little mini icons up at the right, all 7 of them.
Right.
If you,
But we can't whiteboard all at the same time, can we?
No, one person
Oh.
has to be the person, managing maybe a shared Google Doc of pros and cons or
Yeah.
something. You could do it through a shared Google Doc, but I mean, at least one person would have be authoring on a doc that was shared as a screen.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy to do it on my one that drops, and then if the whiteboard drops, I can tell you because I'll still be on the iPad.
yeah, that's fine. Okay, why don't we do that?
I'd do it, but I don't type very fast.
Oh, that would appear to be my 1960s skill that I got, or 70s, whatever it is. All right, but I'm gonna log in let's see if it'll let me log in twice. Let's start with that problem first. Maybe in the interim, did you already discuss just general process and how you want to do this?
No, this is part of the process of whiteboarding it.
Okay, hang on. 3, 4, 3, 6, 1, 2, 3, 7. I don't know if it'll let me log in twice. It's just spinning.
All right, well, at least if someone
Oh,
is,
it usually
you know.
does, though.
I can take handwritten notes while we're doing this.
yeah. All right, so,
I'm going to grab more paper though.
okay.
You know what? It does. I know last week I logged in twice, so I'm going to try it while Dawn's taking notes and you can get started.
Okay, so Andy, do you want to start with a candidate?
Yeah, which do you want to go right through the order of candidates, or the order we saw them the other day, or how do you want to do that?
Yep, you know what? That's actually a good idea. Why don't we go through the order that we saw them?
Oops, sorry.
All right, so we can start then with Gary. Do you want to know pros, cons, both?
Both.
I mean, how do you
Both
want
is
to
fine. Yeah.
manage that? So certainly an advantage that I saw that he had was that he was a sitting superintendent. I think that probably someone who's doing the job, that is somewhat beneficial because he certainly knows the landscape. In particular, right now, he knows the situation with the state, with the ESE, and their calls they've been having with superintendents over the past several months, kind of an ongoing basis, updating them on what's going on with our reopening plans for the fall. So certainly that his communication, I was particularly interested in that him reaching out to community, setting things like getting involved in a Rotary Club. His idea of kind of reaching out to outside groups, talking about collaborating with Harvard on some surveys, and then his his ideas around communicating with parents, even if you don't have the end message that you want to have for them right now, acknowledging receipt, I'll get back to you, let me find out some more information, rather than the silence piece, I think was important. So for pros, do you want to go into cons as well at this point, or? Okay.
Yeah.
For his interview, I felt like there were a number of places that he was a little bit vague, where other candidates, and again, we'll speak to him rather than the other candidates, but I think he didn't speak in specifics enough for me with regard to a couple areas. In particular, I didn't hear a lot from him with regard to collective bargaining and his experience there, whether that was something that, one, he felt comfortable with, two, he had a lot of experience with. I didn't feel like I heard enough there, knowing that we're looking at a teacher contract right now that's not ratified, and we have other contracts that will be that either are open or will be in the next few months. So those are some concerns for me for him.
Thank you.
Just a lack of
Catherine?
specificity. That's all.
Yeah. Catherine, do you want to add to him?
Sure. So, one of the things that I used as a pro, and I recognize that this isn't in the immediacy, but that he has a lot of experience with the capital projects and managing that sort of stuff. And if that comes up again in the coming year, he's very familiar. He's already done a lot of the applications. He's done a lot of the processes of building new buildings, which I liked a lot. I thought that he, so when I was doing this, as we were going through the interviews, I made a pros con and a list con, and then I just sort of on the side gave them a Zoom score, because you have to be able to talk to people on Zoom right now. And I feel like in the coming year, this is like how you communicate via Zoom is going to be really important, because it might be the only way they get to know people and talk to people. And I gave him a very high Zoom score. So I think that his communication skills were strong for me. I also really like that he has some experience. He does have experience in the role of superintendent, which to me was sort of his biggest plus, because when we need a superintendent, it made sense to me that we would plug in a superintendent. And dovetailing with that is that his time in the superintendent role, he's already gone through that system, creating the reentry plan that was encompassing and multifaceted, and that they've already had this process. We obviously don't know exactly what September is going to look like, but that he's gone through that, and that's exactly where we are right now. That was a big plus for me.
Any deltas?
Oh, I'm sorry. We're doing that now too. So I was a little concerned that he moved around quite a bit, that like he was seemed like he was hopscotching a little. I did a little bit of research into superintendents, and it seems like we're a rarity in Holliston that we had someone that was here for 16 years, that there is kind of like a gathering information process of professionalization that goes on with superintendents. So for me, that was a red flag at first. And then as I kind of looked into it more, the red flag kind of faded a bit. So that was my biggest one for him. I felt like he could jump in and start right away.
Thank you. Lisa?
Okay, so I would definitely agree with the pros that have been stated so far. In addition, I also felt like he was a good fit in the sense that, he talked about social justice and innovation and social emotional. I felt like he understood what we were looking for, and he would bring those same interests, which I think is really important in terms of fit. I really loved that he had already put together a reentry committee of 60 community members. I think that is exceptional. And most of what I wrote down, and communication is a huge priority for me, and a lot of what I wrote down had to do with that. I felt, he talked about transparency. He talked about the importance of both oral and written communications, and regular communication with families weekly. I really liked all of that. And I guess similar to Catherine, I didn't do Zoom scores, but if I had, I probably would have given him 5 stars. I think that he came across as very personable. And I actually think that, the way the candidates came across on Zoom is super important, since that's going to be our only way of communicating probably for the next few months. So I would have given him really high scores on that. On collective bargaining, I didn't have the same. I wrote down that he, part of his approach was just meeting on a regular basis and sort of cultivating a good relationship proactively all along. So I liked that. Again, really liked the work that he mentioned on social emotional learning and embedding it into the curriculum. Yeah, I don't really see any cons with him. I see a lot of pros. That's it for me.
And Louise?
Got the document to work and I'm signed in on another screen. I haven't typed the content in, but I can share it with Dawn so she can do that. Or anybody, I guess. So I really loved Gary's enthusiasm and, you know, I have to be honest, when he first started, and I think it's the nature of a Zoom interview and the nature of, you know, sort of this whole process being a tad awkward. It was kind of a little bit rocky, but then as he moved through the interview, I thought he did indeed address a number of things that I think we all have been desperate to hear, quite frankly, for years. His desire to connect with the community, with parents, his collaborative approach in his current and former district. And yes, like Lisa, I thought the fact that he gathered a reentry committee so quickly, it was a little daunting to hear a 60-person committee, but he qualified that and said there were a number of sort of subgroups and task force. But what was important is that he thought it valuable to gather the voice of not only the administration, but the teachers and parents, et cetera. And I think that matters a lot. And it will go a long way toward buy-in when the ultimate plan is put in place, and that matters. So I liked the way he approached that. I too shared some concerns around his very short tenure in his current district and even in the first one. It is true that superintendents do move around, and we have enjoyed the stability that came with a superintendent who has been here for 16 years. That, by the way, has its own, I think, advantages and disadvantages. But I think I would say this. A new superintendent in his or her first position, depending on the scope and profile of that district and personal circumstances, might or might not have chosen to stay beyond 3 years. It was a little bit of a question mark for me when I saw the change, but I did also do some background digging, and I think I understand why the change happened and why Mr. Reese is currently seeking a position now. And that made sense to me. So I'm not terribly worried about that. The things that Andy brought up about specifics on other areas, they did concern me. Yes, he's been a superintendent, and like Catherine, I was really delighted to see he was so involved with the MESB and the building process, because God knows we'll need that if that opportunity comes our way. But I don't know that opportunity is going to come our way this year. I think this year our immediate challenges are far more significant with respect to negotiating a contract, managing the overall sort of shift in our curriculum and culture and thinking around social justice, and our extraordinary budget challenges that will take creativity and craft work, not only in just sort of the actual numbers side of it, which I believe Mr. Begay has down, but in the solutions we propose to mitigate the need for additional funds. That is essential. And you know, there's a sort of a number of other critical issues. On balance, I felt like, you know what, we have the talent in place to deal with a lot of that. And So maybe Mr. Reese brings something new to the table with his communication skills and his strong ability to connect with everybody in the district and be very collaborative. That seemed clear. But you know, I'd still have pause around the specifics and the underlying, like, you know, will he lead us in those other things? Will he be able to pull together a process and approach very quickly on, you know, how we're going to get through the reopening? I don't know. I just don't know where we stand on that. It's uncharted territory, so it's almost unfair to judge with anyone, but I did wonder about that, to be honest. So I don't know if that helps or hurts, but I don't disagree with anything anybody said, so I guess that's where I would leave that.
Thank you. Dawn?
Thank you. I will try not to be redundant because I also do not disagree with what was already said, so I don't want to be too repetitive here. But I do think that he showed some strong communication skills. He was collaborative. He talked about consensus building. I do think that there was a lack of specific examples from someone who has held a superintendent position at 2 different school districts. Like Anne Louise, it does give me pause that he had a superintendent. Oh, I think actually he started as an interim superintendent with Amesbury, was hired on as a superintendent, and then left before, I believe he left before the contract was completed or prior to renewal of an additional contract, moved on to Westport, has a permanent superintendent position, and is now seeking an interim position, which is clearly just a 1-year position. You know, he talked about social justice and innovation and social emotional, but I thought it was devoid of some important specific examples for someone who's been in a permanent superintendent position for several years. One thing I really did like is those DESE, that DESE update had come out on Thursday, and he did provide something very specific that was buried within that, I think it was like 25-page update that came out, and that was that it provided for funding, $225 per student, a formula grant, and he was specific about that. He brought that up, and that was important because it had just come out that day, and it was important that he brought that up in his interview to show, you know, we do realize that he is knowledgeable. He's been involved in those plannings with the state and with his own community. I was encouraged by the fact that they had put together a 60-person collaborative task force that involved parents and teachers and administrators. He talked about surveying parents for both their fears and challenges. But I am concerned about a lack of experience in some of the areas that I think are going to be very important for next year. And again, I don't disagree with anything anyone else has said so far. I will say this was my second opportunity to be part of an interview of Dr. Reese because I was on the preliminary screening committee, and I thought that his first interview was similar. I kind of like to assess and mark the answers to each questions, and I do think he interviewed well both times. Thanks.
Thank you. Mrs. Listovnik?
Can I just hang on, Stace? So, Dawn, I just created this doc, shared it with you. It should be a separate screen if you want to share it, Stacy. But in the meantime, maybe Dawn just takes notes. And then if and when you're ready, we can maybe come back and look at the whole thing. I don't know.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
Okay.
So I also had an opportunity to meet with Gary twice because I was on the screening committee. I agree with Dawn, and I agree with pretty much everything everyone else has already said about him. I think he interviewed very well both times, even in this environment of being on Zoom. I think that one of the other things I thought about was the fact that he has been an educator and a special educator, and I think in particular during this time, that skill set is really important. That's been just different than anybody else hadn't said. Again, his building experience is great, but as a 1 year, I don't see necessarily the relevance of that for this year. He talked about, I did pull up one thing that he mentioned in his earlier interview about his, experience with union contracts. And he says that he met on a very regular basis every month with the union to really kind of talk with them about their needs. And in Amesbury, he said that he was able to negotiate a 3-year contract with the teachers union in just 3 sessions. So he did offer that as a specific in his first interview, which I think is important since we're still in that discussion. I did really like his communication strategy, which I think is going to be huge. If any of you had an opportunity to watch his kind of state of the schools addresses that he was doing on almost a weekly basis in Westport, he shared what he did know, what he didn't know, and it was a lot of things that we really want to see here in terms of him being able to be out in front of issues and be proactive rather than necessarily reactive. And I really appreciate that from him. I'm trying to see if anything else that's different. He did talk about the importance of being visible to the community, and his passion for embedding social emotional learning is something that I thought was very pervasive in his discussions. And yeah, I think that's it for my pros. That is different, different, I guess. And similarly, as everyone else, in terms of the cons, it is the little bit of a jumping around, and I think there's context around that, I'm sure, that we've talked about, in terms of him being there for 3 years and moving on. Yeah, so I don't really have anything more to add. I think he's a solid, really good candidate. I don't really have more than negative to say about him in that regard. Thanks.
Thank you. So the only thing I will add that no one else has said is he is leaving his district in the midst of a pandemic. And for me, that's a big red flag. Regardless of how strong or whatnot, that is a huge red flag for me. Andy, do you want to move on to the next candidate?
Sure. So next was, is it Widad? Okay. So I really found her to be a fascinating candidate. Just having experience overseas in an international school is, for me, an interesting perspective that is in some ways probably something that we need to consider, someone who has a larger global perspective. And so I saw that as an asset. However, I think right now in 2020, for the fall of 2020, there was a lot of concerns I had about her candidacy that kind of outweigh that. So the experience was really terrific. It does sound like she's working in a very large district that's a private district that is significantly different than our own. So that's a first concern. The second one is just not having really any practical experience working in the kind of labor management dynamic in the way that we know it here in Massachusetts was a concern for me. And then lastly, just her removal from the Massachusetts public school system, especially right now with so much coming from the governor, coming from the DESC. And I mentioned that our first candidate had some experience with that, being on those calls and those things. That's the piece I would be worried about, her having a pretty steep learning curve with regard to getting up to speed on understanding really what's going on with regard to funding, regard to regulation, and those sorts of things. So as a candidate, I thought she was intriguing, but I think once she started to speak and respond to some of our questions, it became apparent that she, for me anyway, didn't feel like a really good fit for us right now. That's not to say that when we're looking for someone in that permanent position, she wouldn't be interesting, but I think right now we have a very unique set of circumstances that we need a skill set that I'm not convinced that she has. So that's all.
Thank you. Catherine?
So I really liked her as a person. Like, she seems like the kind of person you want to go have lunch with and have coffee with, be friends with. She seems like such a warm, emotive person. I really enjoyed speaking with her, although I felt so badly that she was up in the middle of the night. That seemed like an unfair disadvantage. I did think that sometimes she didn't answer the questions that we were asking. She rambled on a bit and then never really she got to a point, but not the point of the question. She was not as clear and concise as I would have liked to have had the answers. I felt that some of her answers didn't demonstrate that she had a firm grasp on what we're dealing with here in the United States, but specifically in Massachusetts. Some of the answers around race issues and incorporating them into the schools, to me, didn't seem like she maybe had a clear idea of what we're dealing with. It was a little concerning to me that they don't have unions where she works, and that's so important here, and our relationship with the unions is so important. So that was another red flag for me. I think that, just as Andy said, she's a really interesting candidate, and I really liked her. I don't know that she's the person to step in and do crisis management that we need right now. But if we were in kind of more regular times with a more kind of calm space, and we had the time to let her get up and running, she could be a really fascinating addition to our system. But I don't know that now is the time for her.
Good, thank you. Lisa?
Yeah, I'll be brief because I think I would just agree with everything that's already been said. I found her to be personable, no doubt. But I do think that, the combination of not being in Massachusetts recently and having never served as a superintendent in the US, combined with being in the middle of a pandemic, I think there were just way too many strikes against her. I wrote down no unions and big letters, all caps. And I just think it would be way too steep of a learning curve. But I would second what everyone else said.
Thank you. And Louise?
I was fascinated by Wadad because I think sometimes just a completely different perspective can be enormously valuable. And again, I believe that the leaders that we have in our current district, or in the district now, have a lot underfoot that, can give us stability. But I couldn't agree more. Like, I wish she were someone we were looking at for, with more time ahead of us, or maybe for a slightly more junior position in central office, because I think she could bring a lot of perspective to the table, not just a global perspective, but quite frankly, sometimes private institutions have the freedom to do things that you can't always easily implement or wouldn't even consider in a public district, because sometimes there's a way, to bring that knowledge to the table. But I agree. I think it frankly wouldn't be fair to her right now, because we would have expectations that are so high, so fast. I just think, she wouldn't be able to hit the ground running, and it would actually place a burden on the rest of the administrative team to try to bring her forward. So I would say she's got great potential for the future, but not for Holliston right now. But you know what? I just want to, if she ends up watching this, shout out to Wadad for applying and for her willingness to be up at 12:30 in the morning and go through that interview, because it did show passion and interest, and that was appreciated.
Thank you. Dawn?
Okay. I would agree with everything that's been said so far. I will say she was personable. There was a lot of positivity. She was warm. She's the kind of person you'd want to work with and for. However, I think the lack of experience in a U.S. school and a Massachusetts school in the last 5 or 6 years, and the fact that she was previously a principal when she was in the United States, when I asked why Holliston, why now, she talked about an opportunity to return. She talked about it's meant to be. She talked about becoming a superintendent as a professional goal. And while she has wonderful characteristics, is highly intelligent, I think that this is a particularly challenging year, and we need someone either with the experience or can get up to speed quickly, and I was highly concerned about that. I think that some level of experience with unions and collective bargaining is absolutely a priority for this year. And in looking at her against the other candidates' answers on systemic racism and equity work, I just didn't find it to be as strong. And that was an area of concern.
Thank you. Sin?
So just to start out, just so you all know, the first interview we did with Widad, it was 2 a.m. her time. So, and she was still so engaging. Her optimism was just infectious in some ways. I mean, she really just felt like this is a moment in time. We're going to push through this. And that she was so absolutely talked about her staff as so supportive and engaged with them in this collectively, this, someone who personified this, we are in this together. And I really felt that from her. And I think I believed it from her. She clearly loves kids. I have to agree with everyone else that there's so much to love about Widad in terms of how I think that she would boost the morale, I think, of our community so much. I think her communication style would be a good fit here. However, there were so many gaping holes in terms of, her ability to work with unions and understanding what's happening right here in Massachusetts and being embedded in that. But I really wanted to give her that second look for all of you to see what's out there. I think that I really would love to see her come back in a different time, in a different place, like Anne-Louise said, and maybe a junior position. I think she has such a wonderful perspective, and I do wish her well. I just don't know that that's a good fit for us right now.
Thank you. I agree. Very personable, and actually reminded me of someone in my family. But my biggest concern is communication, and there wasn't, a plan from her about communication. And if we're going to look at the community in the face and say communication is one of our biggest issues, I can't move someone forward if there's not a plan or not evidence of strong communication with the community. So, all right, Andy.
All right, so we're on to Susan. Is that correct? Okay. So as a candidate, I really enjoyed her presentation. I think she had, as we all saw, some pretty significant challenges with her Zoom issues, and certainly didn't let that get the better of her. She didn't seem particularly flustered by that, even though she apologized for feeling that way. So I was really pretty impressed with how she interviewed. I liked how she spoke specifically about the social emotional piece for education, even before we really got to that part of the interview, which I thought was kind of important. I also liked her speaking in absolutes and with experience that she actually had. So she spoke, for me anyway, spoke in specifics. And I really liked that she was able to give us specific details. I think that particular things like when she talked about collective bargaining, which for me is one of the things that, given I've been on the negotiation committee, caught my attention. So I really thought she was a pretty strong communicator. I thought she had presence. I liked that she was able to give that experience. I didn't really have a whole lot of negatives other than she hasn't done the role of superintendent before, which is maybe a negative, but I think that she has experience that will serve her well, that I didn't find that to be a significant handicap. So that, if there was a concern, it would be that, but that was pretty much it.
Thank you. Catherine?
So almost exactly the same as what Andy was just saying. She brought up social emotional learning and issues of race without having to be prompted in the slightest. It was clearly on the forefront of her mind, both of which I think are going to be main concerns for us as we re-entry. The unions, she has a ton of union experience, but the collective bargaining is really strong. I think there's a lot to be said for how calmly she handled the fact that her technology was disintegrating during a time that she had everything to lose. So we know from experience that she's calm in the face of crisis, but she also spoke about safety, and she talked about things like safety, but she mentioned Sandy Hook and that sort of level of safety, which I think is a real strong point. I thought she was compassionate and empathetic. I liked her communication style. I felt that she had really strong answers, and was able to give very specific examples, not just of what she would do, but what she has already done, which I really liked a lot.
Thank you. Lisa?
I liked that she talked about sort of all the points that are really important to us. I went and watched a little bit of the interview she did on social justice. I know that's a key passion for her, and I really liked that. I liked that I liked the communication skills, that she's very collaborative. Really impressed that she drove around Holliston and looked at our buildings. I thought that was definitely a really good sign that she's not only interested, but she's the kind of person who will do her homework. And I saw that as, going above and beyond, which I definitely like. We need somebody, I think, who's going to be very hardworking. And I got from her that she's just a very hardworking person. I liked the way she talked about mentoring and empowering teachers and students and staff connection. Very sensitive to teachers. She said something about we'll see trauma for teachers too, and that needs to be addressed. I felt like she was thinking of things that not everyone is really talking about yet. I liked her backstory, just sort of how, she seems like someone who has had a really interesting life and has really worked to get where she is. And I would second the other positive things that were noted, in terms of communications. She has union experience, talking about SEL. So I don't want to go on and repeat other things. The one thing I will note, I put a big star by, she said something about it's important to realize when you've made a mistake and learn from it. And that's something I definitely value in everyone, but particularly in leadership. I think it's important to know that we're all always learning, all of us. And I think it's important to always keep that in mind, no matter where you are in an organization. I do think, so my concern is, there's just a lot of positives with her, but I think my concern is that not just that she hasn't been a superintendent, but that she hasn't been immersed in the crisis over these last several months. I think that everybody working, through no fault of her own, but I think everybody working in the crisis has learned a ton in the last three and a half months the hard way. And I'm a little concerned that she hasn't been immersed in it. If she had been a superintendent before, or if she had been working as an assistant superintendent these past few months, I wouldn't be as concerned, but I'm a little bit worried that that's going to mean kind of not the learning curve isn't going to be quite, it's going to be a little steeper for her. The other thing I would say is that even despite the issues, I do think she was very poised in handling the communications issues, the Zoom issues, but I didn't feel as much of a connection with her as I did, say, Gary over Zoom. I felt like, not that she wasn't personable, but that she wasn't quite as personable as he was. I felt like he was someone that is going to be easy to relate to for almost everybody. And with her, I wasn't as sure about that. I mean, I did think she was personable, but I just felt like there was something, I don't know what the right word is, but not quite as relatable. So that's it for me.
Thank you. And Louise?
Hi. Susan for me was really an interesting option, and the beginning of that interview was so difficult because of the technical challenges. I went through something like that years ago where I literally fell down the stairs as I was getting up in front of an auditorium, and then I had to stand up and make believe I hadn't just done that and the audience hadn't laughed. It takes a lot of composure to move through a moment like that and regroup, and she did, and I was really glad that I didn't have to walk through my house with my camera up because I'm not sure everyone that would have exposed everything, and she did that. So, you know, I have to give her a lot of points for making her way through that scenario. I thought Susan had some very impressive experience. She has the most years under her belt of the 3 external candidates. And for me, that mitigated any concern about her not being a sitting superintendent. And the reason is that I think the districts that she has served in have, first of all, I think they're larger, but they have a different structure. And the roles that she has played have been leadership roles in very defined areas that in a district like ours, we don't even have some of those roles. So for me, I was not concerned. I think she conveyed her ability to step in and take the reins, and frankly, to dig deep on some of the topics that we have major challenges on right now, from negotiating the contract, social justice, et cetera. She's done that. And so I don't think she'd skip a beat taking that experience and that leadership training into the corner office, if you will. I really felt she had a lot to offer. She talked about her financial, a number of things she's dealt with financially that gave me the comfort she had the acumen she needs to be able to help us address some of the upcoming challenges. So that was a concern. Not a concern, it was a concern I had going in that I felt she really addressed. And I really thought she beautifully interjected the ideas of social emotional learning and the importance of that with, and especially around the teachers. I have to say, I agree. I was really, really impressed that she showed the sensitivity that this is not just a student issue, that our staff are really, they have a lot on their shoulders, and we are going to have to address that. And I think she would be better equipped to help figure out how to provide those supports than anyone else at the table. You know, as I won't repeat all the other things that I heard that were positives, because I agree with all of them. I think for me, the one thing, and I'm going to take it with a grain of salt because I think it was hard under the circumstances with Zoom. I also did not feel that sort of personability, or just sort of that there was a little bit like almost like I don't know, stern or sort of seriousness in the moment. I felt like I couldn't break through and just get her to smile until the last few minutes, and then it came through. It came through when we asked her if she had any questions, and she said, "Why would you hire someone like me who can't even get her technology to work in the middle of this pandemic?" And she laughed and smiled, and that gave me a moment of relief that, in fact, she is somebody who can kind of like, you know, just sort of, you know, has a little bit more of an easygoing personality. And I think that is going to be really, really important in establishing connections, not only with, you know, her immediate colleagues in central office and the administration, but with the teachers and importantly with parents. And that is sort of the only thing, like I didn't hear specifics from her with respect to how she would be communicating with the community and with parents. Mr. Reese was the one who really gave, I think, maybe the most direct examples on that. But I do believe Susan will do that. I believe she's capable of it. And I think she would be open to some coaching on that front, frankly, and input. And that's important. So I guess you know, there was that tad bit of unease just around that. Like, is she going to really be like someone who can come to the table and work with our team and not just like lay down the law? And I think she could, but I also don't think she'd be afraid to make hard decisions, and that's important too. Yeah, well, I'll leave it at that. There were one or two other just like small, it was more like question marks. I'm not sure I fully understood why she's in this spot right now that she's in. I think I understood that there were two assistant superintendents and one of the two spots was eliminated, but I know all her references and everything came back glowing. So I suspect it was a structural issue and not something that we should be concerned about. So I really liked her. I did.
Thank you. Dawn?
Okay. I thought that Susan was positive. I thought she was confident. I didn't find her confidence abrasive. I found it to be the kind of thing we would need to make difficult decisions and bring this district together. When asked about why Holliston, why now, she talked about our stable schools and our high expectations. She talked about being collaborative, the stability with leadership and teachers, the continuity of the programs and the progress. But I also thought she got very specific in some of her answers. It is important to me that she is an instructional leader, that she's had 25 years in education, both as a special ed and regular ed. Maybe not her delivery, but her specific examples of her work in the 25 years that she's been in education demonstrated compassion to me and demonstrated a passion for this job. I think that she has a high work ethic. I think she has the experience we need in terms of contract negotiations and budgeting. She's been on budget subcommittees. She's been on policy subcommittees. She's negotiated, I think it was like 7 contracts with the team. I liked her answers in terms of reopening and the flexibility. And I think she may have been one of the few that talked about a plan to evaluate for the regression that we're all concerned has occurred. And may even continue to occur as we make our way through this next year. And that was incredibly important. For someone who may not currently be a superintendent or an assistant superintendent, I thought she spoke articulately on what was going on the DESE guidance that we have to date and on different plans. She talked about hybrid models, she talked about blended learning, but more importantly, she talked about the future, which was addressing the regression, the types of evaluations, the social emotional trauma work, supporting students, surveying, addressing those issues, and that was important to me. She gave some specific examples on budgeting. She had strong knowledge on Title I funding and creative and flexible uses there. And then in terms of communication, I heard things that were encouraging in terms of consensus building, being a collaborator, listening, experience communicating in a crisis to parents and teachers. She actually talked about a specific example of lack of ratification of a tentative agreement and moving forward, kind of stepping in there, relying on her skills as a listener, taking a collaborative approach, almost using interest-based bargaining methods to move it forward. I thought she gave us specific examples of being proactive. Go back here. I think it's really important. We asked the community and they answered. We asked people to provide feedback on the candidates, and I am so encouraged by how many people were part of that. We had dozens and dozens of emails. I know many of them were forwarded on to the rest of school committees so we could all review and assess that, because I think it's important. It's not just the 7 of us. So I think to that point, I want to talk about some of the things that the community reached out. to talk about in favor of Susan. Caring, strong communicator, collaborative, excellent listener, consensus building, transparent, experience with budgeting, experience negotiating contracts, clear vision, effective leader, collaborative leadership style, passion for social justice, solid understanding of current COVID guidance, repeatedly, calm demeanor, extensive experience aligned with HPS district needs, commitment to prompt, transparent, regular communication. So those are just a sampling of some of the remarks that I had written down in terms of the feedback we got from the community who engaged and listened to those 4 hours of interviews and then reflected on them. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Dawn, you took all of it. So also as being a part of the screening committee, I did have an opportunity to meet with Susan twice. So some of I'll try to see if I can highlight stuff that Dawn did not. One of the things she talked about in her preliminary interview was being instructional leader. She talked about tying our professional development and our strategy to and focusing on student outcomes. She talked a lot. She's in that whole interview. She talked about making sure that we're all here for the students and putting what's best for the students first in the forefront of her mind in any decision that she makes. And she talked about that throughout her interview. Pretty much every question kind of went back to that, from what I recall. She also talked about her in terms of communication, that she really felt that it was important for her to earn trust and be very clear with her expectations. And she didn't want to blindside staff, that she also wanted to be available to listen to them, but also to give them heads up about things. She never wanted to make them come to some meeting and blindside them with questions that they weren't prepared for. She felt like that was an unfair thing to do. She did have a lot of contract experience. She negotiated 7 contracts as an assistant superintendent, talked about this is about not an us versus them, and being very proactive with monthly meetings. I think of something else that she didn't talk about. She did talk about some enrollment challenges at the school that she was at, that a charter school had come into town, I guess, and they had to talk about going from 6,800 students to 6,000 students or something roughly around that. So they were losing 800 students, and that was significant. So that they couldn't increase staff, and she had to meet with, it was very difficult conversations she had to have with parents, and really discuss with them and listen to them and try to problem solve, collectively around that issue. What else that I can add to that? She also talked about some grant writing that she had done, and to get to fund a safety grant that she had written. And I think that she's kind of always on the lookout to look for grants to support some of the programming that she'd like to do. I think that's the only thing that I can think of that's new. And similarly, I want people to know that, we did get a lot of feedback from the community, which was great. I'm glad so many people engaged in this process and reached out to us to offer their feedback and their thoughts and concerns and opinions. And all of the ones that we received that came in from Dawn and I, or just, myself, or, to forward it on so that everyone had an opportunity to see what the community is thinking about this. So I just wanted to let everyone know that we did that. Thanks very much.
Thank you. There's advantages and disadvantages to being the last one to speak. So I will add the one thing that none of you picked up on that I appreciated, and when she talked about policy, making sure that staff understands the policies and what they mean. I thought that was huge, just for a couple of reasons. And Lisa's question, the last question about how to make decisions and balancing us wanting to get students back into the classroom, but safety concerns. She said we need to be clear and communicate where we are in the process, and that's important. I initially she was not a stellar interviewer, but the more she spoke, the more substance came through. And I appreciated that, where I feel like with another candidate, I think great interviewer, but not a whole lot of substance in terms of listening. So I I did appreciate that from her. And also, we've had this conversation before. I'm very self-aware of this. I have a very stern look on my face, and we all know what that face is called. I think that she may also have the same sort of look to her, and that doesn't mean that she's not collaborative or wouldn't be your best friend. So I think we need to be, mindful of that, that it's hard to, get to know someone in 1 hour. So I just want to be mindful of that. All right, Andy.
Okay. Our last candidate obviously was Keith Boudet, who we all know fairly well. He had, I would argue, the biggest advantage and probably the biggest disadvantage of all rolled into one. I've interviewed internal candidates before, and the challenge with the internal candidate is that it's difficult to market yourself to a group of people that know you quite well. Because they know what you've accomplished, they know what you've done, they know how you operate. And so there really isn't any room for you to pretty that up with colorful language. But I don't think that is sometimes the disadvantage of the internal candidate. I don't think that Keith needs to do that. I think that those of us who've worked with him for a number of years know that he is thoughtful, that he is really skilled at what he does, and what he does is truly all-encompassing. We know that he has, in addition to just the budget, he does all the transportation. He's at different points mentored other central office administrators. He's worked with our student services. He's done a lot with our lunches over the past few years. And so all of those things really show someone who, as he said, really understands the inner workings of our school. And again, that gives him, when he speaks in an interview, a significant advantage over other candidates. So there's really no question that he can do a lot of the things that will be asked of him over the coming 12 months. But my concern is one that was certainly brought up by some parents, and it's not certainly a flaw of his, other than the fact that he has not taught in the classroom, that he doesn't have the experience to be an academic leader. And I don't necessarily always see that as a disadvantage. Dr. Jackson was here for 16 years, having not taught in the classroom, and certainly made that work for his tenure with us. But I think that the community certainly is looking for somebody who can, in addition to do all of the managerial, all of the HR, all of the busing, all of the logistics, have that ability to speak to the community as an academic leader as well. And so I think that if there is a flaw in his candidacy, that probably is it. I really understand that he certainly knows the buildings better than anyone. He already has established relationships with the boards in town, with someone like Chief Cassidy, who's certainly going to be important in our opening in the fall, things like that. He really has those relationships solidified. But I think the other piece is what's lacking. So he is certainly an asset to us. I'm not sure that in this moment, in this role, he's what our community is looking for, rather.
So,
Catherine.
So one of the things that was just, glaringly obvious was just his wealth of knowledge, that there's probably no one around that knows everything that he knows in terms of operations. And, in a very major way, that's one of our biggest hurdles in getting back to campus, is that, how do we get these kids on a bus? How do we get them, to recess safely, to lunch safely, if that can even happen? I loved the way he talked about, and the way he labeled the fully open model versus fully open hybrid versus actual hybrid. I really liked that nomenclature. I had those words to think about it, and I was appreciative that he had thought about it in that way. So I just, more than anything, I think as I was listening to him speak, I was sort of just blown away by the depth of knowledge that he has about Holliston and about the job. Like he said, he knows these buildings inside and out. I think in some ways his greatest asset is also the sort of, not negative, but the reason why I would want him to stay where he is that I feel like sometimes when you have something that you know so well, it can be hard to hand that off to somebody else. And I worry that he would still want to be part of all this operations because it is what he lives and breathes. It might be hard to step away from that in a moment of crisis, give it to somebody else, and then do a different job. And I worry about him having to sort of manage both at the same time. That said, you know, from a more selfish perspective, I am incredibly relieved that we wouldn't lose him. We will still have him no matter what. You know, we don't have to. It's not an either or, but that he'll always be with us, and I think that is. We're just so fortunate for that. I think that the ways that he knows the system and knows the town is a huge advantage. I just don't know if he has the teacher piece that Andy was talking about before. So I won't repeat that because I agree with what Andy was saying before. I think more than anything, it's his eye towards operations is his greatest asset, is one of our greatest assets. I do think that he led his answers sometimes with an operations response rather than one example is the social emotional learning question. He led with an operations response, which I think is great because that's the way he thinks, and we need him to think that way. I just don't know if that's the way we need the interim superintendent to think.
Great, thank you. Lisa?
Okay, I think that Keith scores very high on the Zoom personability scale. I think that, you know, we all know him and he's very, very relatable. And he talked about how he's sort of says things as they are, and he definitely does. You know, I feel like he would be good at the transparency piece. I've seen him in union negotiations firsthand. I feel like he is definitely extremely skilled in that area. I think he is, he's been doing that so long, it's almost like second nature. I feel like he really has a good way of seeing both sides and being very fair and communicative when he's at the bargaining table. He has a ton of support in town. I meant to say this earlier, but I want to echo the thanks for so much input. I was really impressed by the amount of input we got from community members, staff, parents. People wrote some really thoughtful emails. It was really heartening to see how many people took the time to watch all the interviews and give us really detailed feedback. So thank you for that. And on that front, Keith had a ton of support from community members, from staff people, from teachers, from people who have worked with him. And I think that's really important. I think on the con side, he's sort of a victim of his own success in the sense that, you know, we really need him on budget. And my concern is that he would end up doing two jobs. I feel like it would be hard for him to let go of the reins of the budget process, and it would be hard for us to let him let go of the reins of the budget process. And he would end up trying to lead the district and manage the budget, even, you know, assuming we hired an interim budget person. And then we would be in the position of, you know, letting go of that person in another year when he went back to being the business manager. So I see a lot of complications that way. He does not have as much support from parents. I don't think we got a ton of emails, like I said, from people in the community and staff who support him. The emails from parents went kind of the other direction. I don't feel like I don't think he is seen as someone who is going to communicate with parents in the way that people are looking for. And the other piece is we do have internal expertise. You know, I think that yes, there's no doubt Keith could hit the ground running faster than anyone. But on the other hand, I'm not sure that that's the number one priority right now. I feel like we have a ton of great internal expertise with our assistant superintendent, who was, obviously a principal for years before he became an assistant superintendent. We have principals who are seasoned. And I feel like what we need now in Holliston more than anything, particularly on the communication front, and I can't emphasize this enough, is an outside set of eyes. I feel like we need, after 16 years of having one superintendent in place, which was good in many ways and positive in many ways, I really feel like people are hungry for a breath of fresh air, a different, set of eyes, a fresh perspective on what's going on in Holliston, and some expertise coming in from the outside to collaborate with all the great internal expertise we do have. So I think that, he might be a victim of his own success. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And Louise?
Sorry, I had to unmute. I think we may be a victim of Keith's success, more than that. So this is the hardest one to provide feedback on, because I think we as committee members have an understanding of what Keith does at a completely different level from the community at large. And the title of business manager, quite frankly, doesn't capture it. Keith has not only been in the district longer than perhaps any single other administrator, but he has actually done a lot of these roles and has had to work more closely with every single person in the system than anybody else. And that institutional knowledge gives him insight that is extraordinary. The other thing about Keith is, in the world of hard working, I want to share some of this because I feel like it's important for everybody in the community to know. I'm not sure there's anybody that's harder working. Keith is accessible via text 24/7, late at night, early in the morning. When it came to determining snow days, Keith is the one up at 4 a.m., literally out on the roads and collaborating with emergency management professionals, because he lives in town, to determine what's going on. He's out there on Saturdays. He's out there on Sundays. Like, he knows our facilities. It's more than budget. And he knows them in the context of what the instructional needs are. He's not an educator, and I think he's very self-effacing about his own strengths and sort of shortcomings. And he put that out there. He didn't try to sugarcoat that. He acknowledged that he is not an instructional leader, and went a step further to acknowledge that he's not concerned, because he knows he has in Peter Botello not only a partner, but an amazingly skilled curriculum leader. So I thought that said a lot about him. In leading up to this point in our search, I took the opportunity to reach out to some of his former colleagues, including Sarah Ahern and Meg Camiri, who've had to work with him very closely over the years. And they couldn't speak more highly of his willingness to collaborate and get up to speed and learn the things he didn't know to be able to do what he needed to do and make sure that he was supporting them. And I think that's how Keith views his role. His current role is in supporting the other administrators and making sure they can be most effective in what they are doing. But Keith knows he's not the instructional leader. Now, the tough question we have right now is, how essential is that? And I have to say, I guess I would agree that the community and that we need that fresh perspective to be able to engender some faith and motivation and enthusiasm in the district, especially among parents right now. It's interesting. We, among all the feedback, and it was tremendous. I am so relieved that the community provided all the feedback that they did. I haven't even gotten through all of it, but being able to see and read it firsthand. So I want to thank Cynthia and John for your willingness to share it, because it's not only helpful for this process, it gave us, I think, more insight than we've ever had in terms of what the community is looking for and where they want the district to head. And I think that's so very important. We also got feedback from teachers and importantly from the president of the HFT, and she offered insight or perspective on each of the candidates. And I was very impressed by that. And but obviously the most lengthy feedback was with respect to Mr. Boudet, and it was really pretty impressive. So, I guess I don't see him as a victim of his own success. I think we're so comfortable with where he sits and what he has done. I want to make sure we don't put him in a box and not allow for the fact that he could potentially do more, if you will. I do think it's important to hit the ground running, and I believe that either Susan or Keith kind of fits that answer. I don't think we have time for a learning curve. It's probably the single reason Wadad doesn't feel like the right solution right now. But I do believe that's important. So I guess I want to acknowledge everything that Keith brings to the table and that he's doing right now to help orchestrate this reopening plan, because any superintendent that comes in is going to need Keith probably more than any single other person, and it would have to be Keith getting them up to speed. It doesn't matter who comes in. They could start tomorrow. It's going to be 30 to 60 days before they are having an immediate impact. And if we're not thinking that, then we're not being fair to whoever fills that spot. It's just, even the best person coming in is going to have a lot to get up to speed on, and they are going to need to rely on the building principals, the administrators, the teachers to help shape this plan. And so I think that's an important thing to acknowledge, whether it's, any of the external candidates or Keith. So I guess I think it's important for him to have the support of the community, as well as to be able to, I don't want to distract Keith. Maybe that's a better way to say it. I think Keith, if we were to put him in the role of superintendent even for a year, I think we would need to put support in place for him to be successful in that role. I don't think it's because he couldn't let go. I think it's because he wouldn't be able to, because there's so much that needs to get done and he would be pulled into it operationally. So I think my concern is that we really need him to be leading the district in what I would call, frankly, a COO level, not a, business manager doesn't do justice to all the jobs that he does. So I guess that sort of said it all. So.
Thank you. Dawn?
Again, I will try not to be redundant, but that's what happens when you're number 5. 19 years of institutional experience and knowledge. He has some of our key concerns, operations, budget, negotiations, he comes in strong on all of those areas. I am a little bit concerned about the communication piece. We work with Keith. He is transparent. When I need an answer to something, I can call him and talk with him, and I have a full and better understanding of it, and I find him to be highly transparent. At the same time, we are getting a lot of feedback from the community about how important it is that it be prompt, transparent, regular, in multiple forms, that there be forums, that they be part of that. And that's certainly something that I am concerned with. We need someone who can unite the district, unite our curriculum instructors, our teachers, and unite with other important areas. It's going to be a very difficult year. I saw repeatedly concerns in the community about, are we trading one problem for another? And by that I mean next year, operations and budget is critical. And that's Keith. And by moving Keith from a business manager position to a superintendent position, are we just moving pieces around and creating another hole in a very important area? And knowing Keith, he would try and do both, and that is a concern, because I think that that next year is difficult, and we need more players, not less. And sometimes it is important to bring in an outside view. That being said, I absolutely agree with Anne Louise's statement that he is much more than a business manager. He's more of a COO here. I do want to say that I really liked his response in terms of, he recognized that area. Hey, I'm not an instructional, I don't have a strong instructional background, but he recognized the assistant superintendent, Dr. Patello, and the 4 principals in those areas, along with our curriculum leaders and the whole team. And I have to say that was incredibly important to me, because that showed leadership, recognizing the areas that are deficits for you, and recognizing in others in your team how to do that. So that was actually showing leadership, not just telling us about it, and that was important to me. I think everything else has been said, and I don't disagree with anything that has been brought up. Thanks.
Thank you. Cynthia?
I think we should have had Anne Louise go last, because she just takes every point. It's true, though. All right. So what can I share about Keith that hasn't already been shared? I think Keith has incredible self-awareness of his own, like what he knows about the district, which is deep. I mean, the knowledge, the institutional knowledge that he brings is second to no one, really. I know that David Keim has been here longer as a principal, but in terms of that central office role, no one is more committed and vested in this community than Keith is. And he has relationships with every board in town, from Chief Cassidy, the fire department, the police department, Parks and Rec, the select board, the finance committee, that you can't, no one can jump in and be able to have the relationships that he already has established here. So we all very much recognize that. And he did talk about in terms of what he lacks, and I think he used the term that there's a deep bench here in Holliston of educational leadership, from the principals to his partnership with Peter Patello and curriculum. So he talked a lot about that. I do feel that Keith would feel pulled in multiple directions, and I am concerned about that. I am concerned about how he'll manage the communication aspect from a parent and community aspect. I mean, we know that when we want an answer to something, Keith will tell us the truth and not what we want to hear. He's always been very forthright and fair-minded in his responses to me, and I think across the board to anyone who opens his door and says, I need to talk with you about. In this current environment, I feel like it would be hard for him to move into that role as a superintendent and be that person who is supposed to be the communicator and balancing the curriculum side and the operational side, and where we need him so desperately to move us forward in this. So but he does have a great deal of support. We had a former school committee member who spoke very highly of him and said that no one has a bigger heart than him, works harder than him, and he does have a lot of support. So I know that parents may be wary of him, but I think that if you know him as a member of this community, he is very dedicated, extremely dedicated. So I think that's all I can add.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anne Louise.
You're going to hate me. I have one more point. I just wanted to offer one observation on the community feedback. The only time Keith ever has to speak to a parent is when there's an issue. And I think he's in a really tough spot because frequently in that role, he's enforcing guidelines or policies or something to that effect, whether it's why can't my student ride on bus A on Wednesday and bus B on Tuesdays, or, you know, something else. There's usually a good reason, but it doesn't always feel good to the community. And I think we just have to acknowledge that sometimes Keith's role puts him in a really tough spot that way. So I just wanted to share that.
So,
Can I just add one more thing? Sorry. Just to add some context of what's been going on with since the COVID-19 hit and the schools have been closed. Keith goes to the office every day and parks his truck out front at central office so that people know that there is someone there. And I just want people to know that he's very visibly and wants people to know that it's not like the lights are off and nobody's home. There is always someone there, and it's Keith, just so you know.
are you all done now? Because I don't have an opportunity, because you've all pointed out every foolish point that I was going to say. So thanks a lot, you guys. So I am going to be redundant. Actions speak louder than words. Mr. Boudet has been here with us through this crisis visibly every day. I cannot say that for any other person, and that's not a knock to the other people. But Keith has been here every single day and shown up. The response that we've gotten from the community, our emergency and management crisis administrator, high regard for Keith, the nurse leader, the nurses, staff, and teachers all. I think that says a lot about him. And with that, I have nothing else to say because you've all said it before. With that being said, I do want to share with the community just some process about what has gone on. And also I want to share with you that we're in the middle of this crazy thunderstorm. So if I lose my power, it's because literally thunder and lightning is right overhead. So
Do you want to make one of us a co-host, Stacy, just in case?
Yeah.
Not raining on the Cape.
How do I do that, actually?
If you go to participants,
Yeah.
then you can click on one of us and go to more, I think, and then make a co-host to someone.
Okay. So the night that Brad, the day after Brad was voted in as their Shawsheen superintendent, the next morning, the first thing I did was reached out to the school committee's attorney and said to him, Andy, what are our rights? What do we do? I wanted to make sure that the district stays whole in this time of transition. And his first question to me was, do you have anyone internally who could take this role for a year so that you can do a proper search? And the answer is yes. There are two people that I would consider. I said, but I also want to call MASS and MASC, which are the Massachusetts School Association, School Committee Association, and the Massachusetts School Superintendent Association. And both of the managing directors at those organizations asked me the same thing. Stacy, do you have an internal candidate? Because it is May 13th or whatever day it is. It's not January 1st. It's May, and we're in the midst of a pandemic. And the answer was yes. There are two people I could consider within the organization. When the emergency management director reaches out to me and says, I really think you need to keep this internal for the year so that you can do a proper search, I take that seriously. I have been struggling with this decision since before we even opened a search. So I want the community just to understand that we're not taking this lightly, but this is an interim position for a year. My biggest concern about hiring someone externally, and even actually Keith, is that this person is not going to come out of this looking like roses and smelling like roses. We are in the most uncharted time of our life in education, and I feel like we're damned if we do, damned if we don't. And I'm really concerned about that for an external candidate. I feel like no matter what he or she does, it's going to be the wrong decision. I'm really concerned about that. And I just want to share that with the committee specifically. I have been thinking about this day and night. I really am concerned that no matter what we choose, it's not the right thing. And so we got to talk about this. Anne Louise, do you want to share do you want to share the screen?
Yeah, what I was going to suggest, if it's not too much time, I didn't have the first 5 minutes typed in because I launched this just after, people started. So I think it still captures Gary, but I think I was going from some quick handwritten notes. Maybe everyone takes a quick 5 seconds to look through this and just make sure there weren't points missing, including on Keith, because I couldn't talk and type too, and then I found myself just listening. So on that one,
Did you share the doc?
Yeah, I did. I shared it with everybody. It's a Word doc because it was just easier to plop it in there. But it also, in just reviewing it to make sure you think that your points were captured, you'll be able to remember what everyone was saying. So is that, I apologize to the public, but we can share the screen. And then let me just make sure I can share the screen too from this computer. And then you can take a look at it and edit as you see fit. That is so much of me. I don't even want to. Okay, wait, let's see. Share screen. Stacy, I'm signed in twice, so do not share my iPad screen. Can you enable sharing for my other screen? By the way, I love my summer hairdo. The finance committee told me I look like a librarian. I'm going to take that as a compliment, actually.
And I made you the host. I think you need to share the screen.
Sorry, you didn't hear me. Hold on one second.
Wait, so you made me host or her host?
No, she made me host, but it says,
you should be, you can share your
so you want me
screen.
to share it? Okay, hold on a second.
Do you have it up?
I got to toggle back and forth. Hold on one second. Yes, I have it up now.
Yeah, but that's, Stacy, that's why I was doing it from my second screen. I have 2 devices open so that I could share one and still see you guys. Cynthia, are you going to be able to see everyone?
Oh, probably not.
Yeah, so Stacy, can you,
I don't know if let me see if I can, let me try it and then let's just see what happens.
or you make me, just give me sharing privileges and I'll share the screen.
I think I did give you sharing privileges, no?
It's working.
Oh, well, it's up. All right.
Okay.
It's up. So whose screen is up? I don't know whose that is.
It's mine.
Okay.
I
you
can see
everyone?
everybody if I move everybody over into a little corner or somewhere. Hold on.
That's okay. I can see the screen.
Oh, crap. Hold on a second. Sorry.
All right.
We probably all took notes too. I'm not sure that we need to, focus too much on the screen sharing except for maybe the people watching from home. But I think we all probably took notes, right?
Well, my point was just so it's in one place, everyone kind of has a sense of what this conversation just yielded, and otherwise, why were we going through the pros and cons? I don't know. So there it is. If you want, if you don't want to go through it, that's fine
We
too.
can go through it. I'm in favor of it.
All right, I just got to move you guys up a little bit somewhere. Hold on a sec. There we go. I gotta move it over to the side. Hold on. Okay. Do you want me to scroll down so everybody can see the other? All right, well, I'm just, okay.
I think everyone should get in and just look at it for 5 minutes. And if I misrepresented or didn't catch something, then please, it doesn't have to be a laundry list. I think these are the main points on either side. And
But
if I-
because it's a screen share, we can't scroll through the document. You have to do that.
Yeah, but
Right,
no,
so-
but Catherine, you have access, so you can go in and edit. You have access now if you go in your Google.
Yeah. If you go into your email and your Google Drive, it's on there.
Okay.
She just
So-
sent it to us via email. I just have it up so that the public can see, so I'm just scrolling through so you guys can all see.
You have to go in your school committee drive, Catherine, to look at your shared drive.
So I would like to ask, though, are there any candidates who are just, we think are not viable because they don't want to waste a whole lot of time?
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah, I
point.
think unfortunately we can probably agree on taking Wedad out of the conversation. As much as we all liked her, I feel like we all had the same concerns about experience level.
I'm also in favor of that.
Yeah, I as well.
I am too. You know what? I'm going to take Wedad's box and just move it down to the bottom.
Good idea.
Did I catch it all? There we go.
All right.
And thank you for taking notes. That was great. I appreciate that.
I'm sorry, it just stretched to other, like it goes down a page.
Who has the most stable connection? Because I'm going to make somebody a co-host.
I do seem to have a stable connection now, at least on the two devices. And
I'm just going to make you a co-host, Anne Louise, just in case, because.
Okay, if I end up
All right, I did
missing,
that wrong.
so do I need to accept that? What am I-
No.
Okay. What are you making me a co-host? My iPad or the?
Oh, where it says Anne Louise. I don't know. It's not the iPad 10, it's Anne Louise. Was that the wrong one?
Well, I don't know. The laptop is what dropped before, but we'll just go with it. Okay.
Because it's like pouring where I am, and sometimes my internet gets unstable. So I wonder if I can make somebody else a co-host too. Let me see if I can make Lisa a co-host. Let's see. Oh, look at that.
So,
Lisa, I'm banging you on there too.
all right, so let's give everyone one more minute to read through it.
I'm going to just add one more point here I forgot to mention because there's too much to mention. I don't know that the public knows this. Keith has served as superintendent before in Holliston. He did it just prior to Brad's hiring, and the district was truly in crisis at that time, a massive financial crisis and leadership crisis, and Keith stepped in and served in that role as the district was trying to level set.
He was acting though, is that right?
Acting is acting to me. I don't
Yeah,
know.
sure. No, I just,
Anne Louise, how long was that?
I think it was a year. It was a similar sort of scenario. I'm going back through his paperwork. Where is this in?
I think it was pretty soon after he arrived. District,
I think
right?
he had been here a few years. He had been here,
Oh, okay.
yeah, because Brad was here 16 years. He's been here like 19. So he had been here,
Couple of years. Okay.
yeah.
Oh.
Okay, so what are we thinking in terms of the three candidates? In my mind, there's actually only two candidates left. Does anyone else feel that way?
Oh.
Do you want to go around and ask about top
Hang on
two
one-
candidates? Does that help?
Andy, go ahead.
I gotta close my window, so hang on one sec.
Okay.
Did you guys get the peepers in? Oh, sorry. I mean, our little chicks are outside, sorry. But now they're in.
All right,
Okay.
so can everyone mute so we're not all
Yeah,
talking on
sorry.
top of each other? So I'm gonna go around the room. Cynthia, are you in favor of all three candidates? So my question is, I believe there's only two candidates viable at this point. So I'm asking if you agree.
Which two candidates are you talking about? Susan?
Right, it depends on the two candidates we're talking about.
So I believe that the discussion should focus between Susan and Keith. I don't believe Gary is a viable candidate.
I disagree with that.
Is there anybody else that disagrees with that, or is it just Lisa?
Well,
Anyone
I'm
else?
in favor of narrowing down to Keith and Susan. I agree with that position.
I would agree with that.
I was actually at Gary and Susan.
Okay, so Catherine and I want to keep Gary in the running. Does anybody else want to keep Gary in the running?
I think no. I'm between Susan and Keith at this point. Anne Louise?
I was so close to it, but I can't have them all. Like, part of me just wants to merge Gary and Susan into one person. I know that's not a practical comment. I understand why Gary is such an attractive candidate, and I really value that communication skill that he brings to the table, and the fact that he is so personable, and I think would be he does bring a fresh approach in that regard, and that is something that I think we need, but I think we need other things too. And so, from the external candidate point of view, I think I would lean towards Susan. I believe those last 5 minutes when I saw her kind of connect with the audience, and I also had an opportunity to speak with you, Cynthia, John, and Nicole to understand if the pre-screening revealed more of her personality there. I think she has that potential. So I think I would err on the side of choosing, err isn't the right word. I think I would lean toward choosing Susan over Gary from an external standpoint.
Can I make one more pitch for Gary before we eliminate him?
Yeah.
So I feel like we have a lot of strengths in the district. I feel like we have curriculum, we have budget. I feel like what we are sorely lacking is communication. And he came across to me as the best, the most skilled, and the most naturally skilled at communication. I felt like he talked about transparency and gave very specific examples of what he was doing to communicate: the weekly communication, the video communication, setting up a committee of 60 people to work on reopening. I think he is our best bet in communication, and for an interim superintendent in the middle of a pandemic, I would put communication at the top of my list, recognizing that we have expertise in budget and curriculum and operations. Yeah, I'd be sorry to let him go.
I feel like another candidate could move into the role, and we could hire a PR firm, hire someone to do PR for us, to help with that communication, or use the candidate internal, or use someone within the district with strong communication skills. I think I'm concerned that someone is leaving in the midst of a pandemic, leaving their district. That for me is huge.
The idea of bringing in more communication support in general is something we've talked about in the past, and I do think there's merit in considering that, Stacy. I feel like we can't, just in fairness, I don't know how we can ding someone for applying for a position in the middle of a pandemic that we put up a job request for. You know what I mean? Like, it's sort of like damned if they do, damned if they don't. And I get why that concern is there. I do, because I know how we all feel about what just happened in Holliston. But I don't feel comfortable holding that against one of our applicants. But I do think the idea of some external communication support and PR management is not a bad idea.
Okay, well then I will add that a lot of his answers were vague, and I feel like he, like I said, and I think he interviewed well, but when it came to actual content and meat, we got that from another candidate, not him.
Can I just add something? Just to the point about the hiring an external PR firm. That was one thing I noted that he did do in Westport. So maybe that's why he's so good at communication, because he's already got these skills. He's already done that process. That was just another thing that I had noted, was that that he did make that move to hire the external professional support, which I thought was really demonstrated a strong commitment to communication. But I do hear what you're saying about him leaving in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, that's concerning. I obviously don't know this, so the only thing I can say is maybe he feels okay about it because they already have their plan in place, and he feels like he got them set and ready to go. I don't know that, but maybe that's a piece of it, because they said that they have their plan ready. So I don't know.
I had a different take on his acknowledgement that they had hired a PR firm. To me, I was concerned that that indicated a lack of communication or effective communication with the community, that they would then use limited budget resources to have some type of outside firm help with their ability to communicate. There was one email from a parent that spoke to me where she cited an article on signs of an effective superintendent. And the number 2, signs of an effective superintendent, was an effective communicator, a collaborator, a listener, someone who builds consensus. Well, I don't want to, I'm trying to balance the leaving a permanent position under contract in a district amid a pandemic. I think they also are looking at teacher cuts. I'm not sure that their plan for COVID is finalized. While they did have a 60-person task force, I don't think they're ready to submit it to the state or that it is finished. So that does raise concern to me. I have a different reading on the spending money on a PR firm for a public school, that shows a lack of experience or expertise in communication. I do think it's something we have to improve in our district, but I think there are candidates with better communication skills.
Okay, I'm ready. If Catherine's ready to move on, I am. I'm ready to narrow it down to Susan and Keith.
I'm ready.
Okay. Can you guys stop sharing the screen now so I can see everyone's face? Thank you. Thank you. It's just easier to run the meeting, and I want to hear what people have to say, and I want to look at your faces. Okay. So we're down to 2 candidates.
Stacey, I think you just muted yourself. Muted yourself. I can't talk.
No, can you hear me? I'm not.
Oh, no, I can. You just.
You cut out for me for just a second.
Okay.
Can I, Stace?
Yeah.
And
No,
can
go
you hear
ahead.
me? I just want to offer like a small bit of context on this topic of an external PR firm because I think it may be getting misunderstood. And I want to put it to rest because I think the topic of communication is kind of key with both Susan and Keith. So I don't think what this would be is where, we're paying, 3, 5, 10 grand a month to an external PR firm like you would as a company. The context in which this was discussed in the past was more bringing in someone to support central office because the fact is communication takes time. It's not just skill, but to be able to sit down and put out a weekly communication or to engage in webinars or blogging or what have you, it's an enormous time commitment. And so that position of a communications resource does exist in many, many districts. And, if the concept of improving outreach and connections is one that is shared at the community level, then I think there's a discussion around, is that a role that we want to address and how best to address it and what resources would be needed and what budget would be required. What people may not know is that there was a point when this came up and it may have even been sort of costed out at one point over the last 2 years. It was deleted from the budget in favor of other priorities, but that's almost ironic when we're sitting here saying that one of the single biggest things we need and where there's a void is around communication. Communicating is hard. It takes time. It takes skill. It is not always natural. And, I think, Lisa, you've had this experience. I have had to train executives to be effective communicators and going through those PR training sessions. It's not so that you can gloss a message up. That's not it. It's so that you can teach a leader how to communicate effectively depending on their audience and how to be efficient and how to stay on message and prioritize those things that are most important each and every time you're communicating. And frankly, I think that is some training that that our internal candidate would benefit from. I don't worry that he doesn't know his stuff. I worry that just being an efficient, Keith will tell you he's a storyteller, so sometimes he's not always efficient as a communicator. And I think Susan could benefit from a little of that coaching and support as well. There will be enough on her plate if she were to come to the district. And thinking through how to be an effective, efficient communicator is different than being a collaborator. And, even if it's as simple, Stacy, as, when you're on screen and communicating with families in the public, smile, whatever it is. So I do think that might be something, regardless of who we put in this role, that we want to consider. But I don't think it's about hiring an external firm to manage manage this, like this in a way that's not sort of genuine, if you will. That's not the point of it, right? So I just wanted to share that.
So here are what I think the options are. We hire Susan, we hire Keith, we blow up the search. I do not want to blow up the search. We don't have time. I'm just giving the options. So I would like for people to share what they think the pros and cons of hiring Susan are. And I would be happy to start because I'm always the last one to go. So I'm going to go first and say, here's my concern. I think she would be a great partner for Keith and Peter. I am concerned about the expectations from the community on her and what that will do to her career even, right? I'm concerned that this year is going to be a tough year for anybody, even the most seasoned, even the best communicator. and I am concerned about the expectations from the community. That's just my concern. Catherine? Sorry, I'm going around.
No, okay. I was writing this all down. So I'm sorry. Am I talking just about Susan right now? So, in some way, I think that it's hard for me to talk just about Susan, because I feel like if we had Susan and Keith working together as a team, it's kind of the dream team. Like, she has the negotiation and the contract piece. She has the teacher piece, the social emotional learning piece, the diversity piece, and we still get to keep Keith in his depth of knowledge and relationships with the community. And to me, actually, those two together could actually be perfection. I'm sorry if I was supposed to be more specific to her.
No.
I like them together.
No. That's good. And that's good. Lisa?
I agree with Catherine. I think that she is a really good complement to what we have already, which is a very robust set of expertise, skills, experience. I think that she would add a lot of value. And I think that she would work really well with the people that we already have in place. And I think that she would really be an asset, full stop.
Dawn?
Just want to address, well, there was a few things that came up with that, but I will say I am not in favor of blowing up the search. I was always in favor of doing a search, not just selecting someone internal, not because I'm against an internal candidate. I think we have some wonderful internal candidates, but I think it is important to be transparent, open, get community feedback, do a search, even if it was a search that required a 4-hour meeting followed by a 5-hour meeting followed by a 3-hour meeting. And again, great thanks to Holliston High School Principal Nicole Bottomley, and also for our teacher representative to be part of that, because a tremendous amount of work was put into that, to go over the 28 applications, to bring in the 9 semifinalists for interviews, and then to collaborate and deliberate on it and bring forth these 4 finalists. And you cast a net and you see what you have. And we are incredibly lucky to be able to consider and deliberate on these 2 outstanding candidates. So there is so much that is going to transpire in the next month that I think it's imperative that we don't just blow up the search and start again, because I'm not sure that we're going to find a different, better set of candidates than we did in late May, early June, than we will in July. And there's a lot to get done in the next month. That being said, to speak to, there's a lot to get done. I think on balance, bringing someone new in, adding to the team, not just shifting around and creating another problem, which is not having a business manager and not having someone with his 19 years of experience in operation and budget and negotiating during a critical time. I think we are trading one problem for another. And we don't have that with Susan. What we have is a fresh voice. We have someone with experience. I know she was not a superintendent, I recognize that, but different districts, a larger district like Weymouth, she wore the hats that we need. She has experience in the areas that we need, and we would be bringing in a new voice to add to the team, not just trading one problem for another, meaning moving Mr. Goudet out of a critically important role, and that concerns me. I think that his amazing set of skills and the fact that he has done an interim or active superintendent role for a period of time, I think, that is a key pro, but it is a con on balance that we're moving him out of a critical role.
Thank you. Cynthia?
I hope my internet stays on. I've been having some flickering, so I'll try to be brief. I agree with all the things that Dawn said. I'm so very thankful to Nicole and to Erin, who joined us on the screening committee to get us to the point where we are right now. So thank you so much for your dedication and your time. It was a lot to do in a very short period of time, and I appreciate all the work that you did on that. I do agree that Susan, Susan hasn't been in a role for the past year, but she's been really, I think, been very focused on paying attention to what's happening in the district. I'm sorry, I should say in the state. She seemed well versed in following what was happening with DESE. I think that unlike the rest of us, she's probably well rested because she hasn't been, or I hope she is, that she'll offer that ability to kind of come in and be ready to go. I would hope. I do see that she would be a great partner to Keith in his role, and that he has so much to focus on in terms of getting our students back to school in whatever way, shape, or form that happens. And I agree that would be a great partnership for both of them. I do worry a little bit that she hasn't had the superintendent role and what that's going to do for her in this year, but it is for a year. And she's shown such perseverance in her search and in her dedication to students and the interests and needs of students throughout her career. I don't really have any other downsides to play on Susan at this point. Thanks.
Andy?
Hi. I agree, and it was something that Dawn said that kind of stuck me was adding to the team, and I think that this is probably an important time for us to consider that we want more experience and we want more heads in the game on the problem rather than perhaps less. I know that Keith has a wealth of knowledge and experience, and I think that a number of us have made the argument that the partnership that he would provide is or would be essential. So I think that she would be an excellent choice. I think that would kind of round out all of the positions in our team rather than leading to either more shuffling or shared duties. And I really want people focused this summer and into the fall on what the year is going to look like rather than having to perhaps juggle a few different roles at the same time. So he certainly has the ability to do this, but advancing him as a candidate for me at this point leaves other kind of unanswered questions or gaps in what we need to do in the fall. So I think they're both excellent and strong candidates, but I really think that having Susan with us and having her be able to work closely with Keith and to work with Peter and to work with all of the other central office administrators would be wonderful.
Thank you. Anne Louise?
I agree with everything that's been said. I like the idea of having additional knowledge and experience to bring to the table. And I think Susan brings that. I am not concerned that she has not or is not serving in a current superintendent's role. I actually think her collective experience somehow more than makes up for that, as I said earlier. So that doesn't bother me at all. I like the way Catherine positioned this by saying that Keith and Susan together make up a dream team. I believe that. I do believe that together, and I think they will come at life sort of in a way where they can connect and find collaborative solutions together along with the rest of the extended leadership and administrative team. Having said that, for the dream team to be effective, I think Keith is swamped. And I would throw this out to the group. This is a little coming out of left field, and I appreciate that. And this is why I hate doing things on camera. But I think for Keith to truly, for us to tap in to more of Keith needs help. He is a one-man band in a district where you could easily put 10 people on the task of what he is being asked to manage day to day. And I actually think we should consider elevating him. And I'm just throwing this out for consideration, not for discussion today. But if we were to bring on Susan, I would like to propose that we seriously consider elevating Keith to a COO position, which is not uncommon in districts as well, and bring some support to the business management office. He will need that in this coming year to handle all of the extraordinary challenges as we move forward. And I think there's a financial way to get us there to support both positions, and something we should seriously entertain. Otherwise, his ability to really provide that foundational and collaborative support to Susan, I think is going to be hampered. I mean, he keeps getting pulled into the swamp. So that's just a thought, but I would be in favor of bringing her on. I just would like to see us bolster the business manager's role so that Keith can be truly effective in supporting her and getting her up to speed as fast as possible too. So that's a thought.
I couldn't agree more, Anne Louise. Thank you for sharing that.
I think, just really quickly, I just think this process highlighted for all of us how important Keith is. And I think we've it's given us time to reflect on everything we ask him to do. So I agree wholeheartedly with Anne Louise.
I also agree, and I think I don't know about titles, and that's something for later discussion. But I think that that this is an opportunity for a division of labor to best match everyone's particular skills and expertise, and it's a way to address the needs of the community and our vision for HPS. I think part of what's making this decision so difficult is they're both wonderful. So let's put together this team of outstanding leaders and move forward with a better vision for the future.
I don't disagree with any of you, and usually when I usually reach out to Dawn or Andy when I need to have a clear vision on something, so I appreciate your comments today. The one other pressing question I have, though, and this has been asked of me and I don't know the answer is, do we understand why Susan has been the finalist in so many positions but never offered the position? Is there anything that we need to be aware of as to why she's never been put in the role? Screening committee, any?
I will tell you that I was in charge of running her reference histogram. Cynthia, you can correct me, but I think it was something like 32, 33, 34 different references with cell phones, emails, telephone numbers provided. So that was outstanding and unlike anything I had seen before. In addition, I think you can do a full and proper, check into things. I say that I did that, and it is with the strongest of recommendations that I am, advocating for her. I will tell you my understanding of it is that there was a decrease in student population. They were moving around. There were cuts for both at the teacher and administrative level. My understanding is that she was aware of the cut, but continued to do her job with an outstanding work ethic and with grace. And so, no, there's nothing in the reference or background check that gives me pause.
Yeah, just to dovetail on that, there wasn't anything that I saw in the references that she received and the 30-something reference numbers of people for us to contact, and she reached out to each of them so that each of the ones that Dawn wanted to speak with so that they would be prepared to know that someone was going to contact them. And I think that the fact that she has been looking for position and has continued to persist in her search is something that is laudable, honestly. I mean, she's continued day in, day out is working to try to get herself into a position, and she's very passionate about what she wants to provide and give to students. So I agree.
Thank you. And again, on behalf of the committee, I thank you, Dawn, and you, Cynthia, for all all of the hours and the times. Erin Squires and Nicole Bottomley, very much appreciated. Does anyone have any other questions or discussion points that you want to bring up now? Anne Louise?
In our last meeting, you had mentioned, or we had discussed briefly about trying to understand from each of the candidates their availability. Do we have perspective on that? And it may be less relevant because, you know, Susan doesn't have to hop on a plane from Abu Dhabi, but I mean, just like, how soon is she available to work? And just out of curiosity, do we know that?
So I believe it's pending negotiations. She would be able to
Right.
start.
Yeah.
Okay,
based on
but
negotiations.
there's no other impediment, like it's August 15th or anything.
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Does anyone have a motion to make?
I move that we, go ahead.
No, you can. I'm happy to let you do it.
I move that we appoint, is that the right word? Dr. Susan Kuska as our interim superintendent pending contract negotiations.
Seconded by Andy.
Moved by Lisa, seconded by Andy. Roll call vote. Ms. Savard?
Yes.
Ms. Koshin?
Yes.
Mrs. Listevnik?
Yes.
Ms. Hanstead?
Yes.
Ms. Naborski?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mrs. Raffi? Yes. So thank you to our 4 candidates, and congratulations to Dr. Kuska. And with that, I will accept a motion to adjourn into executive session, for which we are not returning. And the executive session reason is we are going to discuss negotiations with non-union personnel.
Moved by Cynthia.
Moved by Cynthia, seconded by Dawn. All in favor? Ms. Savard?
Yes.
Ms. Koshin?
Yes.
Mrs. Listevnik?
Yes.
Ms. Hanstead?
Yes.
That was Ms. Naborski? Dawn?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mrs. Raffi, yes. It is 11:30 a.m. Wow, we've never said that before, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Wait, are we zooming back in, staying on? What are we doing?
Stay where you are.
Okay.
Can we take a quick recess, Stacy?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, great.
How long?
5 minutes?
Sure. Okay, 11:35.